Today on Xtreme 4x4, Ian and Jessi build the twin-turbo motor for their Suburban Gorilla. Plus, how about a race where half the time you can't even see the course? Mud racing, Louisiana style.
Welcome to Xtreme 4x4, where today our ultimate tow monster, the Suburban Gorilla, gets its ultimate power plant.
That's right, our diesel's been a long time in waiting, from design to prototype to the finished product. And today, our Banks twin-turbo Duramax is going to be assembled right here on the show. If you remember, we called Gale Banks to help design the first ever twin-turbo Duramax diesel for our tow monster.
He came to the Xtreme shop with a pile of parts and his chief designer, Monroe. Together, we built some prototype parts, and then those parts came here to Gale Banks Engineering in Azusa, California.
Gale has been building performance engines for years, and his skills really began to shine in the offshore boat racing world, where his 930 horsepower big block Chevy gas engines became the staple in winning boats.
Then he made the switch from salt water to the salt flats, where his creations set records and helped solidify his relationship with the original equipment manufacturers.
And now Gale Banks Engineering is looking into the future, and they see diesel fuel as the answer, and they're using the diesel engines in some rather unique ways.
Whether you've got a Chevy, a Ford, or a Dodge, we're after it. We're finding the limit. We're finding how much those engines will do that come in those trucks. I believe diesel is the future fuel, especially in lighter vehicles. To find the limit, to find out how they'll endure, we've been running a racing program pretty extensively here for the last 5 years. So we've built 4 different trucks to run in 4 different types of racing. The Sidewinder Duramax Type R. This is a world-class road racing vehicle powered by a diesel engine. Twin turboed, about 750 horsepower, capable of close to 200 miles an hour, which is plenty fast for a road racer. This is the Sidewinder D-Max Type D for drag race. And what we're doing there is we're pushing the total horsepower limit of the Duramax. The white vehicle back here is a Dyno Banks off-road stock full class truck. We've done pretty good with it so far. It's a diesel, running against gasoline everywhere else. At the Henderson 400, we took a second. In the process, we beat the truck that won the class in the Baja 1000. The first one we did is this one right here, and that's the Banks Sidewinder Dakota. This is the world's fastest pickup truck. Plus, we drive it on the street. Guys go to McDonald's with the damn thing. Now, when it comes to building your Duramax, I gotta say, I think you came to the right place for that too.
You guys are in for a treat, because most of you have seen inside of a gas engine, but for some odd reason there's this big mystery about the inner workings of a diesel engine, but not after today.
Banks has taken everything he's learned about building killer gas motors and is applying it to the diesel, like lightened rotating assemblies, ported and polished cylinder heads, and different cam profiles. Basically, all the technology you'd use when you're building a killer small block or big block Chevy, and we're going to take that and apply it to our Gorilla motor.
And what we built today will soon be available turnkey from Banks Power. And it all starts with this cast iron deep skirt Duramax block. This one has already been honed with the torque plate, the cam bearings have been installed, and the deck height checked. This bottom end will be held in with some custom ARP main studs. The main caps can be dropped into place, a little lube on the threads, and then torque to spec.
The key to any successful engine build is obviously paying attention to the details, like our crankshaft oil clearance. That's why there's no crankshaft in it right now. We're going to check the size of the crankshaft bore using this bore gauge. We're simply going to slide it in place of the crankshaft main journal and compare the measurement to a measurement from the crankshaft. If it's within specification, we can go ahead, lube up the bearings, put the crankshaft in for good. If it wasn't within specification, the crankshaft would have to be machined and you'd have to get new bearings.
Normally when you build a serious gas engine, you replace the crankshaft. But in a diesel engine, these pieces are already pretty stout. So here they've cleaned up the counterweights, polished them up a little bit, gave them some arrow wings to help shed the oil off that rotating mass. Now everybody say hi to David Basham. Will you help me put this in? This is Banks Power's master engine builder.
Now before we can go ahead and bolt this engine to the engine stand, we have to install this flywheel housing on the back of the block. Not only will this adapt the block to our automatic GM transmission, it also includes the coolant crossover for the coolant passages inside the block.
Later on, the Banks Xtreme Duramax will spin its crank on the engine dyno. But up next, Xtreme Mud Racing, where horsepower and torque run second to a good set of wiper blades. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Xtreme 4x4. We're here in Azusa, California at Banks Power, finishing our ultimate Duramax engine. With it on the stand and the crank in and the cam almost in, all I gotta do is put on the thrust plate and cam gear.
With the cam gear installed, we can go ahead and put the oil pump drive on the front of the crankshaft. And behind that is a reluctor ring that works as a crank trigger, sends a signal to the engine's computer. And once this is installed, Dave can go ahead and put the oil pump on. Now the computer for this engine is a Bosch EDC16 controller. It's the factory computer from the Duramax diesel truck, but just like the engine builders here at Banks get inside the engine and change everything, the engineers get inside these computers, strip all the programming out, and reprogram it depending on what kind of numbers they want to get out of their Duramax.
And while these guys button this up, I'm gonna take you to a place that nobody ever gets to see here at the Banks headquarters. Couldn't handle walking through here every day. Can I go next? Sure. Thanks. This is the boss's office. This is where Gale and his team of design engineers dream up of nothing but big horsepower and torque. And I know we're only a half hour away from LA, but there's another LA just west of the Mississippi, where off-roaders dream of nothing but mud.
Northern Louisiana was once known for its endless cotton fields. Today, the region is considered the mud racing capital of the world.
Come from around Louisiana, you gotta love mud. I've been playing in the mud ever since I could walk, probably.
It gets in your blood. I don't know what it is. It's a Southern tradition. We just like playing in the mud.
They didn't come to Motorsport City's quarter-mile horseshoe just to play.
We work on them all week long so we can come one day and try to tear them up. You just can't ask for no more extreme mud race.
Running two at a time, side by side, Motorsport City's first turn is insanity.
First turn is crazy. About a 400-foot straight drag and shutting your eyes when you hit the water and having to turn left. Can't beat that. That's just part of life right there, you know.
You bring those speeds side by side with another person into a horseshoe curve, it's nothing but good.
In turn one, it doesn't always go good.
You go on that first curve, and if you're behind, you don't have any idea where that other man in front of you is sometimes, so you can't see anything. It's just like the lights go out.
The windshield's totally blacked out and you don't have a clue where you are. You're just waiting for at least maybe a quarter of an inch of a clear spot in your windshield to where you have an idea of where you are.
Your windshield wipers are twice as fast as the stock ones. If a man doesn't know how to make his windshield wipers go fast, he's not going to be able to see a whole lot.
At Motorsport City, Dwayne was ready to tear through the mod class.
Life to us on a Sunday afternoon is mud racing and winning at the mud races.
And that's what his King Cobra was built to do.
This is an 84 Ford Bronco, 900 horsepower. It's like a drag car on mud. This is a 514 cubic inch motor. It has the 514 EX heads, which produces the most torque of any head you can put on a Ford motor. But you have to design the suspension to handle the curve. We added an extra leaf on the back right side to where it would be more stiffer on the back right corner as you come into the corner, which would actually give you more handling. And that's what we've done to our suspension.
Dwayne was undefeated in his first two races. Then it all went bad.
Dwayne, are you okay?
Dwayne and his co-driver were okay. The King Cobra wasn't as fortunate.
When I went to straighten up my steering arm, my steering wheel went all the way around the opposite way and it just went hard left out into the median. There was no control over the vehicle, and I just prayed to the good Lord everything was going to be okay, and held on, and I'm sitting here talking to you right now.
It may have been a rough day for Dwayne, but something tells us it won't keep him from the Louisiana mud.
Words can't describe how great it is on a southern Sunday to be in a mud truck with 900 horsepower, and I don't know what else to tell you.
We're back inside the engine room at Banks Power, finishing up the short block on our soon-to-be twin-turbo Duramax.
Getting to see the inner workings of the diesel engine is rare indeed. And before we leave, some solid pulls off the dyno will let us know exactly what we've built.
The heart of any performance engine, whether it be gas or diesel, is obviously the pistons and the rods. Now this is where the difference between a gasoline part and a diesel part become very apparent. This is a typical performance gasoline piston, and this is the stock Duramax piece. Aside from the fact that the Duramax piece weighs almost twice as much as the gasoline one, the real difference is in the design. The diesel one has a combustion bowl cast right in the top of the cylinder. This is where all the burning of the air and fuel happen in the diesel. In a gasoline engine, it's up in the combustion chamber inside the cylinder head. Now aside from that, the parts are just a lot beefier. You can tell this by looking at a gasoline piston pin versus a diesel piston pin. Now the assembly of the system goes together just like a gasoline engine with a floating wrist pin held in with circlips. Now we're building our engine specifically designed for reliability and durability. And so in the long run, power to us is sort of a secondary option. But in the future, if you were going to put together one of these Duramaxes and power was your main goal, you can get a set of rods like this from Gale Banks. These are H-beam performance rods specifically designed for the Duramax. The bottom end torque means the front cover can be installed, followed by the water pump, the front seal, and finally a newly designed fluid dampener balancer assembly.
Next, the oil pump pickup, the pan, and the rear sump. Now these particular heads have been ported and polished. The intake valves have been replaced with severe duty stainless steel pieces. There's been new chrome moly retainer plates, and these custom valve springs developed by Banks offer slightly higher clamping forces and allow for more lift without coil bind. The Duramax pistons will protrude from the block slightly. You have to match this distance with the proper head gasket. Slide the head over the ARP studs, and torque and adjust everything to spec. Dave's not done with his side yet.
I'm working as fast as I can.
Big difference between the diesel and the gas engine right here. Obviously, a diesel motor has no spark plugs, and the engine timing is controlled by the fuel delivery, and it starts with an injection pump mounted directly to the motor. Now the Duramax common rail injection system, and pressures inside this fuel rail can reach well above 26,000 psi. And that fuel is then injected into the combustion chamber through the injector that's controlled by the computer. And to give you an idea, that's the Duramax fuel injector, and that's a typical car fuel injector that runs at about 40 to 60 psi. Now diesel fuel doesn't really like to start in the cold, so to solve that problem, you have what's called a glow plug in the combustion chamber. This plug will glow red hot and heat up the combustion chamber when voltage is applied to it, and it simply screws right into the head. With a completed long block, we can now install the finished pieces that started as prototypes and mock-ups only a few months ago. With our Duramax assembled and everything checked,
It's down the hallway to the dyno.
here Banks engineers connect every sensor and meter imaginable.
Break-in time, 4 to 6 hours over a 2-day period before going for peak power numbers.
So here's the deal. We're going to build these twin turbo Duramaxes two ways. 600 horse basic crate motor, and then a 750 to 800 horse that's been printed And we're going to use the Power PDA command center on both of those as standard. So you have a basic calibration, and then you can tune the power level from the PDA.
All right, Gale, you promised us 1,000 pound-feet of torque. Let's see what it can do.
All right, let's pull on it.
3, 4, 5, 6, 9. It's gonna crack it. There it is.
There it is.
There it is.
There it is. Yes!
1,000.
We hit it. Hey, get a load of that horsepower.
It's well into the sevens.
Yeah, well into the sevens.
725 horsepower and over
730.
1,100 pound-feet of torque.
I almost want to cry. We're back on the show, and as you can see, back home with the goods.
That's right. Inside this container is our Banks Power Twin Turbo Duramax. Banks Engineering kept our Duramax for 1 extra week to test and tune it and get some good strong numbers off the dyno. Now to put it into perspective for you, a stock GM Duramax only has 650 pound-feet of torque and about 360 horsepower.
And we smoked those numbers with 1,113 foot-pounds of torque and 770 horsepower. Now this engine's ready to go back in for one last mock-up stage. Wow. If you remember the last time we worked on this frame, we spent a lot of time building these super trick upper spring buckets. We spent tons of time bending tube and welding upper coil buckets. Then we slipped in some rough country coil springs.
Well, obviously those coil buckets are gone. We had to cut them out of the way with a cutting torch to make room for our turbos. Now I'm not gonna lie to you here, we screwed up. We honestly should have built the whole front suspension when we had the mock-up pieces here at Xtreme, but they had to be sent back to Gale Banks to have the finished pieces done in time for the motor. So we had to change our plan. Went back to the junkyard and got some stock Dodge upper buckets and some stock height springs. Now the Chevy frame is only 4 inches narrower, so we just had to add some 2-inch spacers. With all the measurements taken, we can weld it in place.
With the engine and the buckets, it also leads to another problem. Now we have to reconfigure our steering or just completely move this box. And we also have to deal with the exhaust. Where the heck is it gonna go? But that's just another day. Ow.